Napalm, Napalm land, Napalm out loud, Napalm out strong. Napalm good things and bad. Napalm happy, not sad. Napalm Vietnam. Call an airstrike to kill the Viet Cong. Don't worry if it kills a lot for anyone else to die. Just napalm Vietnam. La 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 la. Napalm Vietnam. Let the world napalm along. Napalm of love there could be. Napalm for you and for me. Napalm Vietnam. Make it simple to last your whole life long. Don't worry that it's not good enough for anyone else to smell. Just napalm, napalm Vietnam. Just napalm Vietnam. Just napalm Vietnam. Welcome to Does This Still Work? The podcast that looks at old movies and asks, does this still work? I'm Joe Dixon.
And I'm George Romaka, and today we're discussing Apocalypse Now.
Is that what you hear when you hear that title? Apocalypse Now.
I always thought it would be something like dramatic and, echoey. From 1979, and some historical context. First podcasty stuff. You can reach us at dtswpod@gmail.com, on Facebook, Letterboxd, Counter Social, and YouTube. Please tell your friends about us and leave 5-star ratings everywhere. You can pick what we watch and get extra per episode content by funding us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/dtswpod. Now, Joe, take us back to 1979.
1979. How is there not a song called 1979? Seems wrong somehow.
Because 70 is like an annoying amount of syllables to try and fit in. It was the summer of 69. 69, that's a lot easier than 79. Which actually it's not, because I just did it.
Well, I'm not a songwriter, so. Whatever you think of this film, anyone would agree the Vietnamese exist here only in the background. We learn nothing about the people of this country. The film has French imperialists blather on about how Vietnam had nothing until they got there. I'm sure the filmmakers don't mean to agree with that vision, but this picture is entirely from the point of view of the West.
I am not sure that the filmmakers don't agree with that vision or didn't mean to agree with that vision.
All right, we can discuss. But they do give the impression that the French have a point. The Vietnamese are strictly background, and their screen time is mainly them getting shot. Evidently, they have nothing more to offer. So, just to remind us all that Vietnam wasn't only a war, but is also both a place and a people, I will look at what was happening in Vietnam in 1979. This is from the Hartford Courant. Headline, George.
Shattered illusions lie on today's Vietnam.
4 years after the last American government official left Vietnam, its largest city, Saigon, is now Ho Chi Minh City. There is only one Western restaurant. All the others have been closed since the communist takeover. Unification between the North and South is not going smoothly. American sanctions are not helping the country to rebuild itself, and the communist government, besides blaming all the decadence of Ho Chi Minh City on Western influence, they have backtracked on women's rights. While women do serve in the Viet Cong administration, they have status without power. George, why do you suppose the Viet Cong of 1979 were happy to have women fight in a war, but wanted them passive in peace.
Because that's how men's like it.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot in a lot of history I've read, is that the guys will have the ladies up there helping them, achieve something or other, be it civil rights or whatever it is, have you. And then suddenly, once they make some sort of victory, it's like, oh, well, you girls go back and make photocopies or go lie on our beds or something. It's like, Jesus
Christ,
Christ,
pregnant
dude.
in the kitchen making me sandwiches.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like, it doesn't matter what the movement is, no matter how progressive it is, guys just totally revert to the worst bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
It's sad. Moving on. Racial tension between white fishermen and Vietnamese refugees boiled over into violence in a small town in Texas called Seadrift.
Sounds like a dwarven city in a D&D campaign.
Indeed. This headline is from the Journal Tribune. The article is written by Molly Ivins. Those of you who were around during the Iraq War should remember Molly. She was an opponent of that war, and she was also famous for calling George W. Bush shrub and W. Anyway, in 1979, she was just a reporter, and she filed this report. Headline, George.
America, not promised land of all Vietnamese.
I will quote, "The violence began last Friday night when a fisherman named Billy Joe Applin, 35, was shot to death after a fight with several Vietnamese fishermen. Within hours, several Vietnamese boats were burned, and Tuesday night there was an attempted bombing of a crab plant that employs Vietnamese workers."
I just like to imagine that it was foiled by a bunch of crabs.
It's not in this article, but further research revealed that Arlen was shot in the back. Two brothers, Vietnamese refugees, Som Van Nguyen and Chin Van Nguyen, were arrested for its killing.
You don't like naming people just because they killed somebody.
True, but there's a reason I'm naming them here. There had already been a backlash against the Vietnamese coming to town before this. They were seen as economic rivals for fishing in the bay. Plus, America had just ended a war with their nation, so that resentment was also there. As you might imagine, the citizens of the town were not above using the type of language against Asians you will hear in Apocalypse Now. Billy Joe himself used racial slurs and reportedly made several threats against Vietnamese crabbers.
This podcast, I have a history of using a slur chime. There were just so many in this movie, so everywhere, I lost track. So
that behavior by Arlen is possibly why on November the 4th, 1979, the two tried for Arlen's death were acquitted. The jury believed the brothers acted in self-defense. That's why I'm naming them. They weren't convicted of murder. They were acquitted for self-defense.
Okay, but counterpoint.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of straight white people don't get convicted of murder for the murders that they commit, and we don't name them.
Okay, yes. Well, follow my logic on this, George. How common is it for refugees of an Asian extraction or black or whatever, just foreigners to shoot a white man and be acquitted for it?
Not common, Joe.
I'd say practically zero. So
yeah.
I'm going to say it's just not at all like a white man killing somebody and getting away with it. At all. Not even remotely. Not in the history that I've studied.
See, this is actually playing devil's advocate, right? It's bringing up an actual argument that could be made. That's not aimed at you. That's aimed at all the white dude bros who think that just pushing the racist or bigoted narrative is playing devil's advocate.
Right.
We're an instructional podcast.
Now, I have no memory of this case, but I appreciate it has a twist ending. At least for me. Two non-whites killed a white man in Texas in 1979 and were found not guilty. That's amazing. I mean, the KKK took up the cause of Billy Joe. A decade earlier, that would have sealed the fate of the Vietnamese. George, I'm sure you never heard of this, but you are familiar with what racism is.
Am I?
Well, I thought so. You've practiced it a bit yourself. How do you suppose these two brothers, both fresh off the boat, managed to avoid being lynched?
Well, if movies have taught me anything, they must have known some kind of martial arts, and they fought off just waves and waves of white people.
Do they have martial arts in Vietnam? I mean, they obviously have a fighting style there, I guess, but...
They have martial arts anywhere somebody has ever punched somebody else. And that's everywhere humans have ever been.
I guess. And finally, I should mention a term used heavily in the 70s that has been replaced by PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This comes to us from the Courier News. Headline, George.
Experts. Post-Vietnam syndrome is real. Nobody tell Patton.
The problem is this article makes all sorts of claims about Vietnam soldiers. Let me quote from the piece. Dr. Daniel Broida, director of the Veterans Administration Mental Hygiene Clinic in Rochester, New York, said the Vietnam veteran's inability to talk with friends and family about his war experiences is the worst thing that could have happened from a mental health point of view. Vietnam veterans are more given to acting out behavior, he said. They use more drugs and alcohol. They have higher divorce rates, higher suicide rates, and they are more apt to have problems with the law. Some of the behavioral differences are probably due to the altered cultural and social climate in which Vietnam-era veterans grew up, psychologists say. Today's veterans were the adolescents of a rebellious era.
Boo!
But Bruda said he suspects that Vietnam might have enhanced and concealed the rebelliousness. Vietnam veterans are considerably more questioning of authority. They don't observe hospital regulations, and they give hospital staff a hard time. They're resentful because they feel disillusioned and deceived.
Okay, I just want to fix that for him. They are resentful and disillusioned because they were deceived.
But hold on, I got more. Hold on, there's a point I'm making here. And then later in this very same article, the Vietnam veterans we see, they're pretty disturbed, said Dr. Helen Denham, a psychiatrist who heads an alcoholism rehabilitation program at the Canandaigua Veterans Hospital. She said she's observed that Vietnam veterans are more aggressive, more violent, and more questioning of authority than their World War II and Korean counterparts. They have hair-triggered emotional responses, and they often overreact, she said. They frequently threaten violence. The attitude seems to be, if you don't get it by fighting, you don't get it. They're part of a trigger-happy generation. End quote. The analysis here is bizarre. I'm no expert on these things, but I'm fairly certain many soldiers came back broken in every war this country has ever fought. World War I had shell shock. World War II and Korea had terms like combat stress reaction and battle fatigue. I mean, you send young men off to kill or get killed, many are going to come out of it screwed up, regardless of if the war was popular or not, or what generation they are part of. It's weird that medical professionals really thought they had something new on their hands here, as opposed to just looking back like, hey, has this ever been repeated? What about the other soldiers? It's like they wrote this stuff down.
Like, we got mad about this during Patton for the same reason, right? Patton was a avid student of military history back to ancient Rome. Ancient Rome saw this shit. Right? If you read those accounts, you're going to come away, if you really critically read them, you're going to come away with an understanding of the effect that war has on a human being. And it just seems like we don't want to admit it because we just loved war so much.
Well, it's interesting you say we don't want to admit. Do you think that's, obviously 1979 is the case. Do you think that's still true now?
I think it's way less true now. We're starting to realize that, no, we've been screwing this up the whole time.
Because there are places for people now at the VA hospitals to go, and they won't be like, you know, your generation is just trigger happy, and that's what's going on here. That's why you're all angry and upset.
I mean, as underfunded as the VA is, I wouldn't put it past the VA to hire somebody because the pay rate that they can afford is guy who would say that. But I think they'd rather not, which is an improvement.
Okay. Well, with that said, George, tell us about Apocalypse Now.
Alrighty. This was written and directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Also, this was written by John Milius, Michael Hare, and uncredited based on the novel Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad.
Francis Ford Coppola is world famous for the Godfather trilogy. I've never seen those three pictures. I used to think I've never seen them simply because I just never seen them. But now that I think about it, it just seems, I just like to hear people freak out whenever I say I've never seen any of the Godfather movies. Anyway, what I have seen of his is The Con Club and New York Stories.
Nice moment of self-reflection there, Joe.
For John Milius, I've seen Clear and Present Danger, Conan the Barbarian, Magnum Force, and Dirty Harry, which we saw in episode 99. Michael Hare, I've actually read his nonfiction book about his experience in Vietnam as a war correspondent called Dispatches. I read that book without realizing he had anything to do with Apocalypse Now. He only wrote 4 movies, but as of this writing, I've never seen them, including the one everyone knows, Full Metal Jacket.
Which you are gonna watch one of these days.
Probably so. Speaking of books, I've read 2 Joseph Conrad novels. One of them was Lord Jim, and the other was Heart of Darkness. Do I remember them? No, I don't remember. I know Heart of Darkness is on a boat. That's about the most I remember. Sorry. I remember them being fine at the time, but I've completely forgotten these books.
Yeah, I think Heart of Darkness was on a boat on a different continent during a different conflict involving different world powers like 100 years ago.
At least.
There are 100 years before Apocalypse Now.
For sure.
Which was, does math, like 40 years ago. This won Oscars for Best Cinematography and Best Sound. For blurbs, IMDb says, a U.S. Army officer serving in Vietnam is tasked with assassinating a renegade Special Forces colonel who sees himself as a god. I don't think he sees himself as a god. I'm just going to disagree with that.
In the beginning of the film, they say he's being worshipped as a god, and in the Heart of Darkness book, he's being worshipped as a god, but I don't see anyone actually worshiping him. I didn't get that impression.
Nope.
I mean, I'm not sure why they feel the need to protect him one way or the other, but it's not... They don't treat him like he's a god, as I can tell.
No. Amazon says, an army captain's secret mission becomes a journey into madness in Francis Ford Coppola's spectacular drama of the Vietnam War.
Hey, we'll determine if it's spectacular or not, Amazon.
But I will agree that it's a journey into madness. So, the first scenes of this film are a slow-rolling music video for The End by The Doors, which is funny because it's the beginning of the movie. The visuals are faded headshots of the protagonist smoking a cigarette, a ceiling fan, and jungles in Vietnam getting napalmed to oblivion.
Indeed.
For the record, none of the jungles, none of this movie was shot in Vietnam. It was all shot in the Philippines.
Yes. But there was an actual conflict going on at the time, right?
Yep. Our protagonist is Captain Benjamin L. Willard. He's regular Army Special Forces. Basically, he's an assassin. He's in his barracks room in Saigon. He talks us through how his PTSD led to his divorce and how he feels like he's wasting away in that room without a mission. He's drinking heavily and has a mental breakdown, punching a mirror, crying, and wrapping himself in bedsheets. 2 soldiers arrive to collect him for his next mission. They help him take a shower? They deliver his orders, report to ComSec Intelligence at Nha Trang. Captain Benjamin L. Willard is played by Martin Sheen, who we saw for The Dead Zone.
And I've seen him in The Departed, Badlands, Judas and the Black Messiah, Selma, The American President, JFK, The Atlanta Child Murders, and I did see a few episodes of The West Wing.
And I've seen him as an uncredited part in Hot Shots Part 2.
What is the difference between a barracks room and a hotel room? Because a barracks would be... I didn't know.
A barracks room is just a room in a building that a service person sleeps in that's owned by the military.
Ah, okay.
It can be a very nicely appointed room, or it can be a cabin with 32 beds in it.
Gotcha. In any case, Mr. Sheen is drunk as a skunk in that scene, and he's improvising the whole thing.
He's working some shit out.
I was going to the worst place in the world, and I didn't even know it yet. Weeks away and hundreds of miles up a river that snaked through the war like a main circuit cable, plugged straight into Kurtz. It was no accident that I got to be the caretaker of Colonel Walter E. Kurtz's memory, any more than being back in Saigon was an accident. There is no way to tell his story without telling my own. And if his story is really a confession,
Captain Willard reporting, sir.
Then so is mine.
It's a pretty good blurb for the movie.
That is a good blurb for a movie. You know, I didn't even realize that until now, when he says that line that, what is it? I'm about to go to the worst place in the world, I don't even know it. Isn't it? Wait, the first time we see him, he's pretty freaked out about what's already happened to him. So he already knows it's the worst place in the world.
Yeah, but he's going to the worst place in the world inside of the worst place in the world.
Oh, is that how we should take it? Okay.
He's going like to another circle of hell. Willard meets General R. Corman in his barracks along with Colonel Lucas and Jerry, civilian. I'm including Jerry because he's one of the few Asian-looking actors in this film to speak or have an entry in the credits.
And not get shot, also.
And even he only has one line, and I'll play it in a second. The General and the Colonel play an audio recording of the film's Big Bad, then explain to Willard that Colonel Walter E. Kurtz was a high-achieving, highly decorated Army officer with a family back home. He went insane, committed war crimes, and needs to be terminated. In civilian Jerry's words,
Terminate with extreme prejudice.
Willard is cautioned that this mission will never exist on any official record. General R. Corman is played by G.D. Spradlin, who we saw in North Dallas 40.
I've seen him in The Long Kiss Goodnight, The Lords of Discipline, and Rich Man, Poor Man, Book 2.
Colonel Lucas is played by Harrison Ford.
And we've seen him in American Graffiti, The Fugitive, and Blade Runner. Plus, we have an unaired episode of Working Girl that we also saw him in. I've seen him in 42, the Star Wars trilogy, the originals, the Indiana Jones movies, Cowboys and Aliens, Clear and Present Danger, Patriot Games, and Witness.
And I've seen him in Air Force One and the Star Wars sequels. Jerry, the civilian, is played by assistant director Jerry Ziesmer, and we saw him for the show as a trainer in Jerry Maguire.
Oh,
And then Colonel Walter E. Kurtz is played by Marlon Brando, who we saw for the show as Jor-El in Superman.
I've seen him in Last Tango in Paris, which we had on the list as a Patreon choice, and people said, no. So we're not going to see it. I also seen him in Guys and Dolls, Don Juan DeMarco, On the Waterfront, The Wild One, and A Streetcar Named Desire.
At Han Tam, the southern island in Nha Trang Bay, Willard meets the river patrol boat crew that will be transporting up Nung River into Cambodia, where Kurtz is operating from. The designation for those boats is PBR, and not because they float like cans of mediocre beer. It stands for Patrol Boat Riverine.
Do you know anything about those boats?
They were plastic and plentiful.
Is it normal to have so few? 'Cause they seem to be the only ones riding around in that thing.
No, they run into more of them. That's more a function of the film's budget than anything else.
Ah, okay.
He describes the crew as kids with one foot in the grave. The youngest, Tyrone Clean Miller, is 17 from the Bronx. Their machinist, J. Chef Hicks, is a sous chef from New Orleans. The forward gunner, Lance B. Johnson, is a semi-famous surfer from L.A. Finally, the chief of the boat, Chief Phillips, is from somewhere, but more importantly is here now, and it's his boat. He knows the waterways and doesn't smoke or drink. Chief Phillips is played by Albert Hall.
Cool. For this podcast, we saw in Malcolm X and Get on the Bus. And personally, I've seen him in Ali, Beloved, Devil in a Blue Dress, and Con Comes to Harlem.
And I've seen him in Major Payne. Tyrone Clean Miller is played by Lawrence Fishburne. In fact, he was 14 when filming started for this film. He had lied about his age, which many did, to join the actual military back in the day.
And the documentary about this, the filming of this picture, I believe he discovered marijuana when he was out there filming this.
It's funny that a kid in the Bronx had to go to Philippines to discover weed.
Well, but is Lawrence Fishburne actually from the Bronx? His character is, but I'm not sure he is.
Oh, yeah. Never mind. That's a good point. And on that note, Lawrence Fishburne was from Augusta, Georgia. Joe and I haven't spent any time there, so we don't really know if he would have had to go from there to the Philippines to learn about weed. But there's probably a better chance of that than if he had actually been from the Bronx.
Anyway, we've also seen Lawrence in The Matrix, What's Love Got to Do with It, Deep Cover, Boys in the Hood, and The Color Purple.
Which, we spent like a year trying to get in the National Film Registry. Seriously, go there and still keep trying to get that in there.
Yes, why is it not there? Anyway, on my own, I've seen him in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, Contagion, Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, Mission Impossible 3, Bad Company, School Days, The Cotton Club again comes up again, Death Wish 2, and Cornbread Earl and Me.
And I've probably seen him in some of those. J. Chef Hicks is played by Frederick Forrest, who we saw in Falling Down. He's the guy that owned the surplus store.
I didn't realize this until the day of this recording, but he was the original captain on 21 Jump Street. They killed his character off after only 6 episodes.
And Lance B. Johnson is played by Sam Bottoms.
Does he?
If he jumps in the water butt first hard enough.
Yeah. I have seen this gentleman in A Seabiscuit, The Outlaw Josie Wales, Class of 44, and The Last Picture Show.
As the film progresses, Willard will narrate his reading of his mission papers, giving us a profile of Kurtz as a man and soldier leading up to his present shenanigans. From Han Tam, they'll travel a little over 200 miles through the East Sea to Long Hai, where they catch the end of an attack on suspected Viet Cong forces by the 1st of the 9th Air Cavalry, who are to be the PBR's escorts to the mouth of the Nung River, which is held by VC forces. As the boat makes land, there are other soldiers running about. Some are shooting, while others tend to wounded both the Vietnamese and their own. Willard is chastised by a news team director, played by director Francis Ford Coppola, to not look at the camera.
This is when the picture really starts to get absolutely surreal. It almost feels like, are they trying to do a comedy in the middle of this? Is this supposed to be like a black comedy? Because it feels like a bit of a joke, doesn't it, when he's coming by? Can you imagine fighting a war and then there's some guy standing there, go on, keep going, don't look at the camera.
Well,
and he's like staring at me like, what is this?
Here's the thing. That has almost certainly actually happened, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
So
it still feels like a black comedy.
I think...
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
That's the key, right? There's nothing wrong with having a black comedy in the middle of your war drama. Those two things actually go together fairly well.
This, I know you've never been in a shooting war, but have you ever had that when you got off the Navy ship or whatever and suddenly there was a camera in your face for whatever reason? And they're like, hey, we're filming.
But I did go to a U2 after party where I was invited to show up in uniform and act as background for a party. Yeah. So, yeah, service people are props often. A helicopter descends and deposits the cavalry commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore, a boisterous man with a hankering for some surfing who walks the field like he's invincible. He leaves playing cards with the Air Cavalry logo on the bodies of the dead as a message to the Viet Cong. He comes across a badly wounded VC soldier who is holding his own guts in with a cooking pot lid. The U.S. soldiers are unwilling to give that guy water. Kilgore offers some from his own canteen, saying that anyone that tough can drink from his canteen any day. His appreciation and supply of that water only last as long as his attention span, which is hijacked when one of his guys informs him that a famous surfer dude is present, Lance from the PBR.
Yeah, that was another dark comment. Like, hey, he's about to give the guy water. Like, what? Blah, blah, blah's here? Well, it completely forgets the guy.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess does a good job at establishing him as a complete asshole, but that becomes really obvious the rest of the picture that you see him.
Mm-hmm. Kind of. There's a different moment I'll get to in a second.
Oh, sure. I mean, there were a number of moments you go like,
is he an asshole? Isn't he an asshole? Is he an asshole? Isn't he an asshole? Yeah, it's like pulling the petals off the flower. He loves me. He loves me not. Asshole? He's not an asshole. Asshole? He's not an asshole.
So where's he not an asshole?
I'll mention so in a moment.
Oh, good. Okay.
Willard and Chief Phillips confer with Kilgore and his men to get the cavalry on track as their escorts. The deciding factor is that the beaches where they need to enter the river offer some choice surfing, so taking them becomes the order of tomorrow. Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore is played by Robert Duvall, who we saw in our very first episode, MASH, and also in Network and Falling Down.
I think about it. I wonder just how many war movies Robert Duvall's been in.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I've seen him in Widows, Thank You for Smoking, A Civil Action, The 7% Solution, True Grit, the 1969 version, and Bullet.
And I've seen him in Deep Impact, Gone in 60 Seconds, John Q, and Secondhand Lions. So to answer the question you were asking, just how many war movies has he been in? None of the ones that we mentioned, other than MASH, were war movies.
So just these two? I feel like there's more there somewhere, but all right.
There probably are. In the morning, the choppers ride, blasting Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. In the movie, they call their destination Vinh Drin Dop, which I couldn't actually find on any map. Most likely, it would have been Tan Than.
Well, it doesn't really matter because they're in the Philippines, so
right.
None of that's there.
Well, but you can actually map their thing, their whole thing.
Oh, actual Vietnam. Yeah, I get it. Whatever
it's called, the air cavalry make quick and visually spectacular work of the place. After they land, a child with a grenade takes out a helicopter, and we watch Kilgore make sure a different injured child and the mother make it to a helicopter, presumably to be taken to a hospital. There's Kilgore not being an asshole.
Yeah, all right, that's fair. Yeah, I forgot about that part.
There's still fire coming from the bushes when Kilgore tells his surfers to start surfing because the way the waves break on that shore carries the surfers in two different directions, and Kilgore gets excited by that. He calls in an airstrike for the tree line, and bombers come and napalm the heck out of it, giving us some really well-known epic lines.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
And...
smells like... victory.
See, I've always heard that as one line.
Right.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Smells like victory. He says a whole lot of stuff between those two statements.
Yes. You'll find whenever there's a famous quote, the person's usually said a whole bunch of other words around it, and people just pull out the part they like.
Mm-hmm. Exhibit A, the Bible.
Oh, sure. No cursing, but blasphemy's still okay.
Blasphemy is okay. Before Kilgore can rope Lance into joining the surf party, Willard improvises an argument that the napalm smoke blowing is making the beach miserable. Lance yes-ands that, and they skedaddle back to the boat. On the way, Willard steals Kilgore's surfboard for some reason.
Yeah, another bit that seems like a comedy.
They head up the river. After a while, they stop for cover because the air cavalry is sending out patrols playing a message from Kilgore that he wants his surfboard back.
Enjoy the last, folks, because it's going to get darker as the picture goes along. Maybe that was the goal. It's like, let's make it seem like it's kind of funny, like a MASH type situation. And then as we gradually go along, everyone gets darker and darker. It's like not good.
That's not a unreasonable hypothesis. A bit further along, Willard and Chef debark to find some mangoes, while Chef talks about the way the Navy abuses food, boiling steaks and such. And no, I never saw any abuse like that.
You saw other abuse, but not that abuse.
To be frank and fair, Navy grub was pretty good.
What did they just, it was basic, like diner fare, or did you just get a collection of different foods?
It was a cafeteria situation. So whatever they were serving, they served, but whatever they served was pretty good.
No, but I mean, if you were like in Greece, would you have like Greek food, or if you were in blah, blah, you have that food?
No, it was
just whatever.
Yeah, it was whatever we had on board.
Okay.
They make haste back to the boat when they almost get eaten by a tiger. Again, black comedy.
Yes.
They vow to stay in the boat from now on, a vow that they will break at the very first opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're involved to be in the Navy and never leave the boat. I'm fairly certain you're required at some point to leave the boat. Although, to be fair, these guys make up their rules as they go along. I mean, who's stopping them?
Yep. That's how Kurtz got where he's at.
Yeah, indeed.
At night, they reach Howfat, and it's lit up like a carnival. They get off to resupply, and Willard almost pummels a supply officer for trying to charge them for fuel.
Which would have been illegal, right? That's not something you're actually supposed to do, is it? Or you don't even know?
Which thing? Pummeling the supply officer or charging for fuel?
Charging for the fuel. Because you're just supposed to give it to him, right? Isn't that the fuel to the ship?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that a supply depot for the military is supposed to dispense supplies.
And not charge a fee for it.
Yeah. The goings-on are preparations for a USO show. There's a floating stage, bleachers, spotlights, and plenty of alcohol. The show consists of 3 Playboy bunnies dancing for the troops, and it devolves quickly into a melee of grabassery and attempted sexual assault.
Yeah, it's weird when you have a bunch of horny young men and alcohol and how they behave. Who would have guessed?
Who would have guessed? Nobody could possibly see this coming.
Not at all.
On our ship, we had the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders flown on for a show. We all behaved ourselves. Why? Because A, we weren't liquored up, and B, we had men and women on the ship, so we had to behave better generally.
You know, since you bring that up, I'll do a little aside here. Maybe I've mentioned this to you before, but I do remember there was a study that when women are present, men actually behave themselves better. As often as men may act to women, we actually are more, for lack of a better word, civilized when women are around than when they're not. We're much worse when we're an all-male environment.
Yup. We'll see those women again because we were watching their Redux version with a bunch of extra stuff that wasn't in the theatrical release, so we'll just go ahead and introduce them. The Playmate of the Year is played by Cynthia Wood, who was actually Playboy's Playmate of the Month for February 1973 and Playmate of the Year for 1974. She can sing in Japanese and has a PhD in psychology.
And she makes an appearance in Shampoo, which I think I've seen.
Then Miss May is played by Colleen Camp, who we saw for the show in Pulp Fiction.
And here's a fact. She was discovered while working as a bird trainer at Busch Gardens.
That'll come up later.
That will come up.
Not in the summary. You'll hear it at the end.
not the Busch Gardens, the bird thing. Anyway, I've seen her in American Hustle, Election, Ice Storm, Die Hard with a Vengeance, Wayne's World.
Party Time. Excellent.
And also Rich Man, Poor Man, Book 2. That's one of those films that just keep coming up like, oh, this person was also in that same picture.
And I've seen her in Police Academy 2, Their First Assignment, and Police Academy 4, Citizens on Patrol. Spoiler alert, she marries Tackleberry.
Ah.
Her character does. And I've also seen her in Wayne's World. And then a final Playmate that we don't actually see later is played by Linda Carpenter, who was Playboy Playmate of the Month for August of 1976. The next day, they're back on the move. Cleen is telling a story about how a U.S. sergeant killed a Vietnamese lieutenant over a Playboy magazine.
Yeah, don't take the Playboy away from a horny soldier.
They come across what I can only call a feral gang of other PBR crews who engage them in a game of chicken before using a smoke grenade to light the boat's canopy on fire. The crew repairs it with branches from local vegetation.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that part. Yeah, that's the other PBR. Yeah, they've gone feral. Everyone's gone bananas. There's no military command. In fact, you probably bring this up, but he goes from all these different camps or whatever it's called, and he comes asking, who's your CO? Who's command officer? And everybody's like, I thought you were.
The further upriver they go, the less cohesive the command structure is, the more Lord of the Flies it becomes. The chief is starting to wonder exactly where they're to be taking Willard. He's told about 75 clicks north of the Dolong Bridge. This makes the chief squirrely, and Willard promises to release him and the crew sometime before they actually reach his objective. Spoiler alert, that won't happen.
Yeah, that doesn't help at all.
The PBR arrives at a medevac camp that looks strangely abandoned. That medevac camp, a hurricane came through and killed a set, but they'd finished filming on it. They used that set after the hurricane for this scene.
Ah, well, that makes sense.
They let nature do some of their redecorating for them. Nobody around is helpful, and they say that their CO stepped on a landmine a few weeks ago. Tensions are high, and the PBR crew start kicking each other's butts while Willard goes looking through the camp. The promoter for the bunnies calls them over, and they reach an agreement. 2 of their 8 barrels of fuel oil for a couple of hours with the bunnies. The crew grabs the barrels and heads over. The chief is not happy about losing fuel and goes below deck, presumably to rub one out alone.
Now, before we get into the specifics of those scenes, what should we make of that? The women seem like it's consensual, but at the same time, he's prostituting out the...
I'm calling this Lord of the Flies. Like, this is just people in a really crappy situation. They probably need that fuel for the helicopter so that they can get the hell out of there. So that's what they're trading for it. Lance and Chef are first with the bunnies, and I really don't want to describe this scene. Like, it's not the worst, it's just a mindfuck with tits, involves birds and trauma, and I'm done with it.
Very quickly, since you brought up the lady's breasts, I want to point out something that I found very interesting. This movie has a lot of half-naked dudes in it, but you notice, other than maybe a little bit of Martin Short, there's no frontal nudie stuff of the dudes. And I know that was a controversy in the 70s, because while the women were allowed, although the women here, you only see their breasts as well, you don't see anything bottom. But that was a controversy in the 70s, is that if you saw a guy's ding-dong, that was an automatic X, or it wasn't released at all. So, just very curious, because so you see a guy's ass, which apparently is okay, but anything else, and it's, America can't take it for some reason, I don't know. It's just a weird thing that was going on then. I think it's a lot less now. Although, it is still controversial if a guy has an erection. You can show flaccid ding-dong, but if you show a hard ding-dong, then all bets are off.
Further up the river, they come across a sampan, a long shallow boat used for ferrying produce and supplies up and down the river. The chief orders his crew to board and examine the boat, searching for contraband. Tempers are high, and Chef doesn't see the point. Still, he does as is ordered. The local crew are compliant until Chef goes for a particular barrel. A lady on board lunges toward him, and all hell breaks loose. Once the locals are dead, or mostly dead, Chef finds that the woman was lunging to protect a puppy in the barrel. The lady is not actually dead yet, and the chief and his crew start moving her so they can take her to an aid station. Willard shoots her dead because he can't allow them to go off mission. They take the puppy and continue onward in a more subdued mood.
It was a way we had over here of living with ourselves. We'd cut him in half with a machine gun and give him a Band-Aid. It was a lie. And the more I saw of them, the more I hated lies. Those boys were never going to look at me the same way again. But I felt like I knew 1 or 2 things about Kurtz that weren't in the dossier.
Yep, definitely gets darker.
Yeah.
That I find a very powerful scene, especially when they trying to save her and he shoots her. That's screwed up.
Like, yeah, because it was traumatic. The entire thing was traumatic all the way up to that, right? It was just tragedy. It was, oh God, this misunderstanding. It was over a puppy. They were actually not doing anything wrong. Okay, we're going to try and make it right. And then bang, nope, we're not going to make it right. Like that, it took you from low and then pulled you lower, like just out of nowhere. At night, they arrive at No Long Bridge. It is a hellscape. The bridge gets blown up by the VC every night, and every day the Americans rebuild it so that the brass can say the road is open. One advantage to carrying someone on a secret mission is that if command needs to tell that person something, they'll absolutely make sure they get the message. And since the messenger is heading in that direction anyway, he can bring the mail. Willard and an acid-tripping Lance debark to scout for supplies, telling Chief and Clean to meet them on the other side of the bridge. They don't find a CO or fuel. They find some soldiers on the brink of insanity who are terrifyingly good at calculating angles to launch grenades based on the sounds of insults coming from dying VC. They find some ammo, rendezvous with the boat, and head north on the river.
All this is very interesting, and I mean that in a good way. I don't, this is all very interesting, but I don't mean that way. But I'm just saying, I don't know. It would have been nice at some point, maybe something about the people on the boat that they wind up shooting up, or even this point where the guy's yelling at them, to find out something more about the Vietnamese. It's just always just in the background. I understand, look, this is from the point of view of the American soldiers, but these people exist there. It would have been nice to hear something from them other than bullets hitting their flesh.
Willard opens his updated orders. Sometime earlier, another soldier was sent to terminate Kurtz. That soldier sent a letter to his wife that read, "Sell the house, sell the car, sell the kids, find someone else, forget it, I'm never coming back, forget it."
That's what you wrote to when you announced you were getting a divorce, right?
Yep, that's how I did that.
Finally, a yes and, thank you.
That one didn't make me feel yucky. Lance and Chef get letters. Clean gets a tape from his mother that he pops into a portable cassette player. She says she sees him as better than a lot of his friends. Lance, still acting like he's drugged out, is playing with colored smoke flares until the entire boat is enveloped. And then the tree lines erupt with gunfire. The crew man their stations and return fire. Clean's gun jams. He moves to clear it, and that takes him out of cover. And then he's riddled with machine gun fire and falls to the deck dead. The chief drives the boat out of the ambush and turns around to find Chef holding Clean's body and weeping. Lance remarks that he can't find the puppy. We continue to hear Clean's mother on the tape recorder, looking forward to his return, and future grandchildren. She says his family is proud of him and saving up to get him a car. Finally, she asks him to bring himself home in one piece. The voice of Miss Miller, Clean's mother, is played by Hattie Bell. This is her only credit, and fact, that was Lawrence Fishburne's mom. A bit further upriver, they're surrounded by smoke or fog, and it's here that made me think that I would have had a really bad time in that conflict. My nightmares always feature some way of me not being able to see the thing that's threatening me, and the amount of smoke and fog in this movie was unnerving.
But, you know, if you were in the conflict, you would have at least gotten to have sex with the Playboy bunnies.
Yeah, that would have been fun. They find a dilapidated dock and investigate before a small army of Frenchmen materialize out of the fog. They're friendlies and help the crew to bury Clean.
Which, by the way, are they supposed to do that? Are you supposed to bury... Well, I guess they can't really continue to carry the body, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, you can bury your dead. That's nothing wrong with that.
No, I just don't... What is the regulation on that? Aren't they supposed to wrap him up in something? Well, I guess they do. Do they wrap him in a flag? I can't even remember now. He was wrapped in something.
You don't wrap them in a flag, no. You try and give them a burial. You give them as proper a burial as you can, given your resources where you're at, if you can't really carry the body back. And here's where the Redux version decides to come to a grinding halt. So we can have a dinner conversation about French imperialism in a French plantation in Vietnam. I'm not going into the whole thing. I'm only mentioning it because there's one lady, Roxanne Sarrault, who has lost a child and husband in this conflict, who spends the entire dinner looking at Willard like he's the last dick on earth, and she wants it. By the end of the scene, she'll be telling him in bed that he's a man who loves and kills, as she undresses for him. And Roxanne Saralt is played by Aurore Clement.
And we saw her in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. She's the with the ladies on the dock, when the guys break out and they pick up a bunch of women. She's one of them.
Yep. And she was uncredited in that role.
Yes. They could have completely cut that whole scene. That's unnecessary. Does nothing for the picture.
Nope. It's just another pair of tits.
And we don't need to hear about what the French thought of their imperialism.
Nope. Certainly didn't need to hear that either. And most of the people at that table were relatives of Francis Ford Coppola.
Oh, okay. You see, now this is an example of it. How come we got to hear the French give their justification for what they did? And again, we never hear from any Vietnamese.
Good question,
You're going to take
Joe.
out time for this garbage. Why not, there's a whole country full of them.
Good question, Joe. The next day they leave and are on the river again, in the fog again, which shortly erupts with thousands of ineffectual wooden arrows fired by Montagnards, or indigenous people in the mountains of Vietnam. Chief is flipping out, ordering return fire. Lance is amused. Then, out of nowhere, Chief takes a spear through the chest. He falls to the ground, dying. Willard kneels beside him, and the Chief tries, with his dying breath, to impale Willard's head on the spear sticking out of him.
Well, let's face it, they wouldn't be in that predicament if it wasn't for him.
Yep. Lance gives the Chief a burial at sea in the river. Willard tells Chef all about his mission. Chef is in. Lance is in because he doesn't know any better. I think that last acid hit fried him.
It is really weird. They really should have explained what is going on with this guy. Because as you will see later, a whole bunch of stuff happens, and he's just so cool about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just bananas cool. Like, what is going on? Did he suddenly join the other side? What is going on?
And this is 3/4 through the movie. And here's where we meet the cult. And real quick, this was a 3.5 hour movie. This was a long movie.
It was. It's a very long movie, which, as we just pointed out, could have been shortened just by taking out the French.
Well, they could have taken out the stuff that they put in for the Redux version.
Yes, that too. But the whole thing with the Playboy Bunch, which I don't think it was in the original.
Yeah, that was the
and
Redux version.
Yeah, and in the French that just needlessly, it was like padding. Both of those things could have been cut out. Would have been fine.
As the PBR approaches Kurt's territory, the entire river is spanned by a few rows of small rowboats, each with a few Cambodian locals dressed and painted white. The only person to speak from the shore is an American civilian photojournalist. That's his credit, and he never gives us a name. He tells the PBR crew to use its siren, which scares the locals enough to make some room on shore. The photojournalist says he's been covering the war since '64. He describes the locals as Kurt's children and says they hope he'll take the colonel away. The photojournalist says that Kurtz is a wise, great man and offers up this as an example.
Suddenly he'll grab you and he'll throw you in a corner and he'll say, do you know that if is the middle word in life?
If that's wisdom, then yeah, Kurtz needs to die like yesterday. That's dumber than Deepak Chopra, and that kind of stupidity should be a capital crime.
Another person apparently either had his brains fried with acid or something unspeakable has happened to that man.
Something.
Anyway.
The photojournalist is played by Dennis Hopper, who we've seen in Easy Rider and my all-time favorite movie, Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet. Yeah, you love that film. I've seen him in Speed, True Romance, True Grit, 1969 version, Hang 'em High, The Sons of Katie Elder, Giant, and Rob Without a Cause. I completely forgot he was in Giant. You would not believe what that man looked like in Giant. Giant is a James Dean movie and Rock Hudson. Not the man you would later see in films.
I've seen him in Super Mario Brothers, the horrible 1993 one, Speed, and Waterworld. There's an ancient anchor temple up the embankment. As Willard makes his way up there, he runs into the last guy sent to do his job, lovingly caressing his rifle. Past that guy, there are a bunch of decapitated heads strewn about. They belong to anyone. Cambodian, North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, American. The photojournalist explains this as Kurtz sometimes going too far and says that Kurtz is the first one to admit it.
We hear very little from Kurtz, and what we do hear doesn't really give the impression he's particularly charismatic. So you have to wonder what sway does he have over all these people?
Good question, Joe. Did you know if is the middle word in life?
Wow, man, that's heavy.
They reach the temple, and the photojournalist says that Kurtz has gone away, so Willard and the remaining PBR crew go back and wait at the boat. As night falls, Willard gives Chef the call sign codes and radio instructions to call in an airstrike on the area to obliterate everyone and everything in it if he's not back by 2200 hours. Willard goes back up to the temple. Along the way, he's brought to the ground and smeared with mud by the locals. Then his hands are bound, and he's brought under armed guard to meet Kurtz.
And what else happens? I'd say Lance starts laughing.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks he's amused. First of all, I don't know why he's not also captured. In fact, why does Willard take him with him? He should have just left him on the boat.
He's the most useless of the two guys that are left.
100%.
Marlon Brando had gained almost 100 pounds between when he was asked to play this part and when filming began. He played much of this role from the shadows, which was just bizarre, and I think Brando did the film a disservice by not bowing out, since he didn't want to read the source material, memorize his lines, which wasn't unusual for him, or I guess really be there at all. There was one line that I liked, though.
Are you an assassin?
I'm a soldier.
You're neither. You're an errand boy. Sent by grocery clerks to collect a bill.
I liked the "you're an errand boy sent by grocery clerks to collect a bill." I like lines like that. There was one in a Spectre, the James Bond movie. "You're a kite dancing in a hurricane, Mr. Bond." And it was also really evocative of that Guns N' Roses song, Civil War. You're selling soldiers in a human grocery store.
Okay.
A lot of very specific connections in the neurons in my head for me to be able to say that. And I'm not sure that it was worth it, because...
That's usually my function on the show, so it's that's fun.
After that exchange, Kurtz has Willard imprisoned in a bamboo cage. The photojournalist gives him water and a cigarette and says that Kurtz has something in mind for him. Where did the photojournalist get that cigarette? As soon as they arrive, he bums a cigarette off of Chef.
Good question, George.
On the boat, Chef is getting antsy and decides it's time to call in the airstrike, so he starts doing that. Later that night, Kurtz has Willard bound to a tree and comes to visit him, and drops Chef's head in his lap. So I guess he didn't get to call in the airstrike.
I guess not. How did they know he was calling an airstrike?
Good question, Joe.
How did they know the time to cut his head off? How did they cut his head? I mean, it just suddenly happens. Like, what? This seems like a whole bunch of steps that they forgot to add in the picture.
Yeah.
Instead of showing us the French imperialist, please explain to me what happened there.
The next morning, Willard is in a cave or a shipping container or something, and there are children gawking at him through a hole. Kurtz opens the doors and starts reading to him from Time magazine. He says Willard is free but will be under guard. Willard tries to get up but passes out. He's brought to the temple and given water. Then we hear Kurtz reading or narrating. I don't care by this point. When Willard recovers, he narrates how he thought he'd know what to do when he got here, but sees Kurtz as more broken than dangerous. And Kurtz tells him that he has a right to kill him, that Willard has a right to kill him, but not to judge him. He tells a story about when he was in Special Forces. They went to a village to give smallpox vaccines. They came back to find that the VC had cut off the inoculated arms of every child. He saw that as despicable as that was, it was genius. He admired the unclouded will that would allow a man who wouldn't do that to his family or his neighbors, to do that to any child. Basically, he admires terrorism. To heck with this guy. He tells Kurtz that he's worried about what his son will think of him. I should have thought of that before you started chopping people's heads off, you jerk! And asks Willard that if he does kill him, to tell his son everything, the good and the bad. Then an actual indigenous Cambodian ceremony where they slaughter a bull, which we see that whole thing, slaughtering and everything. Willard sneaks in and hacks Kurtz to death.
Now, I was really confused about that because at one minute he captured, but he can't go anywhere unless, or they'll shoot him, but he's free, but he's not really free. And the next thing you know, he's on the boat. Then he leaves the boat to go back to Kurtz. Why was he on the boat? How did he get to the boat? He's just suddenly there.
Well, he says at some point that he was supposed to be under guard, but there was nobody guarding him.
I think he just wandered back and I'll just get the sword and...
Yeah, well, the thing is, remember, Kurtz actually did want to die.
Oh, sure. No.
So,
I'm saying that just...
He said you'll be under guard. Doesn't put any guards on him. It's not like the guards can understand English. So I didn't hear him say that, oh, we're supposed to guard this guy.
Good point. I don't know. It just seemed abrupt because then he goes back and he's sneaking through the water and everything. Like, completely unnecessary since, as you pointed out, the guy wants to die. So what's with all the skullduggery? He just go walk up there and do it. Why even chop him up? Why not just shoot him? What's with the sword stuff? That's a lot harder.
A gunshot would have attracted a lot more attention very abruptly.
But he doesn't care. I mean, they all want him to die.
Yeah, I don't know, Joe. Good question.
He specifically says the jungle wants him to die, the Kurtz wants to die, the people there want him to die.
Everybody wants this guy to die. Nature itself wants this guy to... Well, I mean, nature kind of wants everybody to die. As he leaves, the locals drop their weapons. He grabs Lance on the way, who seems happy either... Whatever's going to happen, he's happy with it. And then they head back down the river. The end.
If there was anyone who should not have survived this, it's Lance. How he's the last man on that boat, I do not know.
He survived the same way that drunk people survive, accidents. He's so relaxed and loose that, he doesn't actually break any bones when he hits the ground. He did that, but attitude-wise.
Okay, George, does this still work?
No, because in the beginning of the movie, they say this mission doesn't exist in any official capacity. At the end of the movie, right before he kills Kurtz, he says, they're going to make me a major for this. No, they're not, you jerk. They're not going to acknowledge that you did this. You just did nothing. That's not the only reason.
Promote him.
The length of this movie is a reason for it to not work. Nobody has the attention span for this anymore.
We're going to have a split decision. I think it does still work, even though I have a lot of problems with it. And yeah, if you can get a shorter version of it, I would recommend it. But it's great filmmaking. And it's just a fascinating film to look at and experience. Entirely too long, and like I said, there's stuff they can completely cut out. But does it still work as a film you can watch today? I think so. I think it still stands up as a war movie set in Vietnam. I know at the time it came out, there was some controversy of it because it was so artsy as opposed to really telling people about the horrors of the Vietnam War. But if that doesn't bother you, then, I'd also recommend Hearts of Darkness, A Filmmaker's Apocalypse, the documentary about this movie, which where I learned that the Lawrence Fishburne not only was 14, but was introduced to marijuana while he was filming this, and various other interesting background stuff. This film shoot was horrible. Just a complete nightmare all around. It's a wonder they managed to get any film out.
And they got a lot of film out.
Yeah, Brando's crappy attitude was the least of the problems that this man experienced filming this thing. Including Martin Sheen had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And he wasn't over 300 pounds, which is amazing. Brando didn't have a heart attack.
Which we should mention, some of what you see and hear from the Willard character is Emilio Estevez.
Oh, right, because his dad was sick. That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Nah, split decision.
So it's a split decision, yeah. That's fine. This is the Patron's Choice episode, and the poll for next month's film is already up on Patreon. The choices are Breaking Away from 1979, Bottle Rocket from 1996, and American Pie from 1999. If you want to vote but are not a patron, you can fix that by becoming one at patreon.com/DTSWpod.
Joe, have you seen American Pie?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I know everything in it, but I've never seen it.
You knowing everything in it but never having seen it is why I'm pretty sure that's going to win the poll.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, probably forgotten Breaking Away. That was pretty popular at the time it came out. And does anyone remember Bottle Rocket? It's a film that introduced Luke and Owen Wilson. It was filmed in Texas. And I keep feeling like the guy who made King of the Hill was involved in it somehow, but I could be wrong about that. Well, it doesn't matter because you people need to vote for it. If you vote for it, I can give you more.
Yep.
But if you don't vote for it, then I can't. Now, George, what's up next?
Next week, and we already recorded this, we'll be talking about Away We Go from 2009.
And away we go. So I guess that's it for this episode. I'm Joe Dixon. Thanks for listening.
And I'm George Romaka. Thanks for listening indeed, because if a podcast drops and there's no one around to hear it, it's just another collection of ones and zeros that doesn't matter.
You were just kind of bending forward, just your ass kind of out a little bit,
cute.
and that's
I
over
love
there.
training birds.
That's it. That's
really
it. That's
did.
very. That's it. Voila. You're beautiful. I just wanna. I can't believe it. Me, Jay Hicks. I can't believe I'm really here. Just think. If it hadn't been for the Vietnam War, I never would have met you, Miss December.
Miss May. Oh, you're just like a bird. Oh, God. Kiss me. Kiss me.
I love birds.
Oh, take like a bird. Take like a bird. Oh, fly, baby. Click and Charlie.
I can fly like an eagle. I'm an eagle.
listening to Does This Still Work? Produced by Joe Dixon and George Ramaka. The hosts can be reached via social media, email, or the contact page at dtswpod.com. Be good to yourself and others, because that still works.
As long as I wasn't clean. Oh, wait, no. As long as never mind, I don't have a... Yeah, that would have been fun.
George, have you ever flown Delta?
Yes.
And what was your experience?
So, at work, we have a gas turbine generator.
George, is it okay to reveal that a person is gay after they are dead?
What's the weirdest item that you keep by your bed?
Okay, George, what film have we watched that would have been greatly improved if the two main characters had kissed?
What TV show would you want to be in, and which one would you not want to be in?